everybody, I'm Bree the Plant Lady, and today I wanted to put together a video showcasing all the things that are blooming here in my Central North Carolina Zone 8 garden in the last days of January. Now there's a million reasons that I love growing and gardening in North Carolina, but fragrant January flowers definitely tops that list. So I hope this video will serve as inspiration for you to put together a must-grow plant list. Well, here we have Prunus mume Matsubura Red in full bloom, covered in bees. It's definitely going to be the theme of today's video. You can see these flowers are so beautiful and they are so fragrant. They smell like big red gum and they are wonderful to bring inside so that you can enjoy the beauty and the fragrance. I currently have them in my dining room and the entire house smells magnificent. I have 5 different varieties of Prunus mume, also known as the flowering apricot, and they are all in bloom. So let's go walk so I can show you some others. And there is the full view of that Prunus mume Matsubura Red, spectacular plant. And then over here, blooming soft pink, really bright white, is Prunus mume Josephine. Now I had this pruned up last summer, so unfortunately, I can't actually reach any of the flowers to be able to bring inside or even give you a close-up view. But you can see this is a nice large tree, totally disease-free. This was introduced by Tom Kranitsky in Chapel Hill, named for his daughter, and he was selecting specifically for better black knot resistance. Black knot is a disease that impacts a lot of different species of prunus, particularly cherries, but of course flowering apricots can also suffer from that disease. So it's great to have varieties that were selected for better resistance. Again, this is Josephine, and she is a vigorous grower. So you can see here, look at the size of that trunk. And this has definitely been in the ground going on 13 years. Nice size. I hope you like my new labels. And like all of the plants that are flowering right now, Josephine is also covered in honeybees. Now across the way from Josephine, we have Pink Panther, which has just burst into bloom in the last 2 days since we've had really nice mild weather. It's hard to believe that a week ago we were frozen at this time, and now today I'm actually sweating with a t-shirt on. Now, Pink Panther, obviously another really tall, vigorous variety. This is one that was introduced by Camellia Forest. Dr. Parks noted that this also had great resistance to black knot. Now let me try and give you an up-close view of all of the pollinator activity and these beautiful pink blooms. You can see it's in full bloom today and you can hear the buzzing of the bees. There are hundreds of bees right now visiting this tree. Now, as I make my way around this corner, you can see the beautiful weeping bridal veil Prunus mume that is also in full bloom. And of course, one of the really nice features of these is that their petals drop and create this beautiful essence on the ground. I love bridal veil. This is another one introduced by Camellia Forest. Of course, you can see that honeybee is very happy. But what I really like about this is, though it's a weeping habit, you can cut these branches and they're really nice and upright in flower arrangements inside. this is the Prunus mume that started January, blooms off. This is Bonita, always spectacular and completely covered in pollinators and even birds. Now this beauty is Prunus incisa Kojo no Mai, and the only drawback with this plant is its suckering habit, but that's all pretty easy to remove. The fact that it's in full bloom right now, the last days of January, makes this an absolute must-have. I've been showing you this for a few weeks in the weekly garden tours, but today it's really burst into flower. So another prunus that I've been showing you for a few weeks in the weekly garden tours, but is really just starting now to put out a nice flush of flowers, is this Prunus subhirtilla variety Autumnalis rosea. And you can see this is, a nice pink form. There's also a white form of this type. And of course, last week's freeze, you can see the flowers that were open are all mushy, but there were lots of buds that hadn't opened, and that's precisely what's starting to put on the show now. This is a really great tree. You can see it wants to grow as a multi-stem specimen. Like the Prunus incisa, it does tend to sucker a bit, so that's just a habit to be aware of. And again, this has been in the ground 13 years, and I haven't done a tremendous amount of pruning, certainly no pruning for the ultimate height. This is now probably every bit 20 foot tall, and it's out here in this shrub border near the road, so it doesn't get any love or care at all. It doesn't get irrigated in the summer, and really the goal here has been to get perennials to cover the ground plane, so I don't even mulch it anymore. But it's a reliable, wonderful plant that, of course, cheers up a January day. And of course, the bees are out in full force, gathering nectar from all of these flowers. Of course, there's a lot more than just Prunus that's blooming today. I have things like Camellias and hellebores and, of course, Edgeworthia. So let me give you some up-close views of all of those beauties. Now, another plant that is always blooming in the middle of winter is this hybrid honeysuckle. This is Lonicera purpussii, winter's beauty. And, it's one of these plants that has really sweet, wonderful smelling flowers. I caution you against it just because it does tend to sucker around, and it could potentially be a bit invasive if left unchecked. I have some work to do out here just to remove some of the plants that are suckering around, but it is a plant that I really do love to have. You can see there's a honeybee gathering nectar from those flowers, and they smell so great. This is one that I really love to bring branches inside, and it fills the entire house with that wonderful fresh honeysuckle fragrance. Now you can see this is tardily deciduous here in central North Carolina, zone 8. Holds on to some of the leaves. Some years when we're colder, all the leaves will drop off, but this is a pretty typical look. I've done a lot of pruning over the years. This also is about 13 years old. I think all of these that I'm showing you got planted in the first round of planting when we broke ground in 2011. And over the years, I've done some pretty significant reduction pruning, which is what I recommend for this plant, because if you don't, it can get really, really big. And, well, you might not really want it to be that huge of a plant, but it's nice to have it as a reasonable sized shrub that you can enjoy those fragrant flowers on. Well, you can see here, I've got a flowering quince that's blooming. This is one called Dragon's Blood, and it's always a wonderful bright red addition to the garden in late January. I love quinces, and this is always the first of the quince that I have in my collection to bloom, but it's definitely one of those deciduous flowering shrubs that more people should include in their gardens because they bloom at such nice off times of year. Back here in the woodland edge, you can see these camellias have bounced back from last week's cold. Here we have irrational exuberance. This is Igalo Four Seasons. Down here is Sahadaharu. Oh. And the first crimson candles have officially opened a few weeks earlier than normal, but there's no stopping them now. You can see this is a great camellia for landscape value. Look at all of those flower buds that are about to open. Really one of my all-time favorite camellias. Even though the flowers are small, they are so abundant. I'm just starting to get whiffs of the Edgeworthia blooms, and these are definitely starting to look more and more advanced with all the yellow starting to show. This here is Edgeworthia Chrysantha Snow Cream. Next to it here, which hasn't started to bloom, is Edgeworthia Pepifera. And you can see how much smaller everything is on this species compared to the Edgeworthia Chrysantha. I have these planted here very intentionally so it's easy for me to show you exactly how different these two plants are from one another. And to give you an update on the big Edgeworthia, also a lot more flowers showing. We have some damage from last week's cold where you can see some of the flowers are actually falling off prematurely. But that happens with winter flowering plants, not totally uncommon. There have been years where I've lost all of the Edgeworthia flowers, so I'm quite relieved to see that these look as good as they do. I'm gonna wait a few more days before I start plucking these blooms to bring inside to float, because the more yellow that you see open, the more rapidly they will develop and actually continue to open once you bring them inside for a floating arrangement. And of course, you know, I love making floating flower arrangements. It's definitely my favorite garden activity for the cool season. But you can also cut Edgeworthia and use them as tall stalks in flower arrangements mixed with any of the other plants that I've been showing you today that are in full bloom. Of all the things that are flowering in the end of January, I'd say this is probably my biggest surprise, to have this beautiful California poppy in full bloom. Well, I hope this video will serve as inspiration for you and maybe give you a few ideas of some wonderful plants to include in your gardens so that you can also have beautiful January flowers. Well, as always, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and happy gardening.